Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek from Figure It Out Baseball. Got a really good Figure It Out Baseball podcast today with a young coach who I'm excited to talk about. He's got a great perspective on things, and I think he's going to be a guy that moves through the coaching ranks pretty quickly. So we'll get into questions with Billy Barker in a few minutes. Billy's an assistant coach at Paradise Valley, which is a junior college in Phoenix, Arizona. Before we get into questions with Coach Barker, I'll give you a quick background on him. He's a native of Tacoma, Washington. He played collegiately at Green River Community College, a junior college in Auburn, Washington. He graduated from Central Washington University in 2018. He did spend one spring as an assistant coach at the high school level before being hired at Paradise Valley. 2019 was his first spring as an assistant coach at Paradise Valley. At Paradise Valley, he does coach catchers and plays a big role in recruiting. Now, because of COVID, in the fall of 2020, he spent the fall of 2020 at Ottawa University, an NAIA school in Arizona. But when they announced that junior colleges were going to play in the spring of 2021 in Arizona, he's now back at Paradise Valley. I spent a couple seasons also coaching spent a couple seasons coaching college summer baseball. In 2019, he was in Eau Claire in the Northwoods League as an assistant coach, the prestigious Northwoods League. And then 2020, he got an opportunity to be a head coach at Palm Springs in the Palm Springs Collegiate League. So really happy to have Coach Barker on the podcast today. And Billy, we just appreciate the time.
Yeah, Jeff, I appreciate you having me on, man. This is big for a young coach, so I'm excited.
So I typically like to start with something that stands out from the bio, but for you, I'd like to start with something else, something that's not in your bio, and it's just basically what you're doing right now as an assistant coach and how you're making ends meet. You know, I don't know that many people, unless they've listened to this podcast and with other coaches I've talked about, but I'm not sure everybody understands what life is like as a college baseball coach, particularly for someone who, doesn't start out at a Power 5 school. It seems like guys that go to those big schools, maybe play pro ball for a while, they can kind of nab one of those jobs early. But for the vast majority of college coaches out there, and it's not just in baseball, in all sports, most coaches end up at a lower level to begin with. And I'm not sure if people know exactly what it's like at those lower levels. Would you mind just talking a few minutes, Billy, just about kind of what it's like there as far as the amount of time you put in, just if you could touch on what the pay is like, whether or not you get into your salary, but just, maybe other things you have to do to kind of make ends meet. Just kind of tell people what it's like starting out with your first collegiate coaching job.
Yeah, it's funny. You might be the first person that's ever called the pay I got at a junior college a salary, so I appreciate that. But when I got into this, as a young coach, you're not going to make any money, and it's a tough industry to get into, and even harder to stay into, and money's a big aspect. And I guess the love of the game is really what draws you to it, and maybe your shortcomings as a player or the fact that you can help other young guys is what kind of draws you in. But then, you live that life for a couple years and you realize, wow, I'm tired of working 3 different jobs a year to, just to pay rent. And that's kind of where I've been, where it's, the coaching is a full-time job, as most people listening to this probably know. And then on top of that, you have to go out and find something else. And for me, I've done everything from delivering pizzas at Pizza Hut to, I've been a substitute teacher now for about a year and a half. And you just bounce around quite a bit in terms of making money. And then thankfully I'm blessed that, I live in Arizona and there's a camp every single weekend at a field somewhere that I can go work. And, that's a couple $100 here and there. But overall, it's definitely a different life than what most college grads, you graduate college and you move right into a job and you're buying a house and buying a car and doing all those things. And as a coach, it's, you kind of got to put the brakes on that and still live like you're in college a little bit. So I wouldn't change any of it. It's definitely part of the learning experience, but at the same time, I'm ready for it to change.
Yeah, and especially, as you kind of just go on with life and things change for you, and as you get married, people have kids, things like that. A lot of those situations can certainly change things, and the other jobs part is something I don't know if people I'm sure other people do it, for a lot of different reasons. Baseball's not the only, or college, college athletics isn't the only industry that's like this. There's a lot of other ones like that, but, I just don't know that a lot of people know exactly what it is like and kind of what it's like to get started. And, those things you did, it's funny just to hear other people tell their stories about the other things they do. I know that my first college job, and I only had to do this once, and I'm very lucky for that. After this first job, I was set up enough between whatever I was getting paid or what my wife was making that I didn't have to do it. But my first job, I had 3 other jobs. I worked with a catering company almost every day. I worked for a valet. I valeted cars when I could, when they had openings, and I was also a bar back a couple days a week. So I was the guy in a bar that would run around like crazy and bring new bottles and retap kegs and things like that. And just kind of whatever you can do to make ends meet at the beginning. But, what another thing people don't quite get, I don't think, or really think about much, is just the fact that you could move at any particular time, because there aren't a lot of opportunities to move up unless you move somewhere else. On typical staffs, there are 2 to 4 coaches, 2 to 5 coaches, somewhere like that get paid. Have you thought much about, just where in the country you would like to go? You're from Washington, living in Arizona. Are there particular spots you'd like to end up, or for you, does it just kind of depend what comes up?
When I first got into it, it was I want to stay somewhere where the sun's out all the time, and kind of like a lot of our players, they don't ever want to move on anywhere colder, and then you realize that that's probably impossible coming from Arizona. And so, like I said, I had particular places in mind, and then as I've moved on to this, it's less of where am I moving and more of where do I fit in, and that has less to do with the climate or the certain state that I'm looking at, and more to do with the coaching staff and the program that I hope to work for.
Now, for you, you did spend some time at Ottawa University, so you've coached at a couple different college programs. What's important for you, like for the next job that you look for? And maybe you haven't thought a whole lot about it, maybe you have, but what are some things that would catch your eye right now if another opportunity came up? Would it be the geography? Would it be how much the team wins? Just take the pay out of it. What else would need to be good for you? Do the amenities matter? Like, do the facilities of a place matter? The level, the conference, anything like that particularly to you would have to sort of match up for it to be a good fit?
Yeah, getting into it, the biggest thing when I started coaching was I wanted to move on to a higher level than I ever was as a player. So like everybody, you want to be a Division I coach, or you want to be a professional coach. And going to Ottawa kind of opened my eyes to some things, just to the differences at the 4-year level, and how different a coaching staff can be, and not everybody's on the same page as the next guy. And so looking at it now, I'd say the biggest thing for me is finding somewhere that I can coach with my kind of style, while also learning from the experience of coaches that have been there longer. Some of the biggest things for me are finding ways to implement data and technology into the game. And like you said, the level is, I'm starting to find out, is less important and more, where can I be who I am? Like, I don't want to go anywhere that I have to feel like I need to change my personality or the way I coach. I want to feel like I'm wanted somewhere, and that, the skills that I'm bringing to the table are important there. I'd say that's probably the biggest thing, is the technology, just with the way the game's changed. And something that my head coach at Paradise Valley told me a while ago was, good schools aren't ever looking to hire coaches. And that can be a little bit untrue, but it opened my eyes a little bit. Like, winning isn't everything. Like, I want to go somewhere, maybe you take that team that's under 500, and whatever you bring to the table can turn them around and help them kind of get over that hump, and you turn them into a team that's playing for a conference title every season.
Yeah, the one thing about the teams that win that I'll say, at least in my opinion, is that a lot of them, they graduate coaches. Teams that win tend to have coaches that are sought after, so opportunities I think can come up that way for sure. But Billy, I want to ask you just about the data and the tech side of things, and you just brought that up. what are some types of data or technology that you really believe in, that you feel like you've got your hands on and a good handle on, and you want that, things you implement now and things you want to make sure that you'd be able to implement in another job that you got, like, where they would say, hey, yeah, go crazy with that stuff, go ahead.
A big thing was at Paradise Valley, this year we got the hitting Rapsodo. We had the pitching Rapsodo last year, which, I didn't deal too much with pitchers, and we got the hitting one this year, and the head coach calls me and he tells me, hey, this is your role. We have a hitting coach that has a ton of experience, and at this point, I'll never claim to be a hitting coach, but I can look at numbers and tell you kind of where the flaws are. And then seeing other programs that didn't utilize that as much, it just kind of opened my eyes a little bit more to, this is where the game's going. This is what professional teams want. This is what Division I teams want. And so if I'm not utilizing that, I don't know if I'm getting better as a coach, as much as if I were at a place that is using it.
Can we talk about Rapsodo a little bit? That's not it's not something that we've covered a ton on Figured Out Baseball, especially in depth. But can we talk about a little bit, just kind of as you're getting to know Rapsodo better and how you can use it with hitters? Obviously, there is a lot of data that can be collected there, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have an idea, but some idea of what Rapsodo can do. But can you kind of talk about what you think are the most beneficial things that you get from Rapsodo? Like, what, I'm sure there's a lot of data that necessarily maybe you don't find that useful, but there's probably other stuff that you do find very, very useful when it comes to what you do as a coach. Can you talk a little about that? Is there anything in particular, or maybe 1, 2, 3 things that you think Rapsodo collects that you find extremely useful in your coaching jobs?
Yeah, the big misconception with it is it's going to take the coach's job, and I don't see it that way at all. Like I said, we have a hitting coach that can pick apart a swing with the best of them. And the biggest thing that I see with Rapsodo is now it's not just our eyes. You know what I mean? So, and it has less to do with individual metrics and more with how do these metrics, what kind of relationship do 2 or 3 or 4 metrics have together? Like a big example for me is guys always want to look at a certain bat speed. And you would think that a higher bat speed would be better, but if you're messing up your swing to achieve a better bat speed, you're probably not hitting the ball that well. And so we try and look at the relationship between bat speed and time to contact with the blast sensor. And it's like, okay, where's the optimum level of, you have a high bat speed and you also have a really quick time to contact? That means that everything's kind of in sync and you're meeting the ball where it should be, as opposed to guys that just want to pull the bat, through the zone as hard as they can to achieve an 80-mile-an-hour bat speed, something like that.
Now with blast, another thing that I don't know that all coaches out there have experienced or have the budget to be able to use blast with their team. What's some of the most important data that you get from using blast sensors with any players on the team?
The biggest thing, like I said, we really try and utilize that time to contact. And then another big thing is the attack angle, right? The angle that the bat is meeting the ball at. And not to dive in too much to like the hitting Twitter and all the arguments we see on there of, a flat bat path versus an upward swing versus swinging down on the ball. But, we look for that optimum number that's where are you meeting the pitch? You know what I mean? And I think where a lot of this gets confused is guys are mixing up a feel versus what the numbers are actually telling us. So you have plenty of guys that are like, hey, go swing down on the ball. But that doesn't, that's more of a feel than it is, this is what your bat's actually doing. Are you actually swinging down on the ball, or do you just feel like you're swinging down on the ball? And so, we try and look at all those numbers, and we have various ranges that you should be within. And if you're out of those ranges, then, okay, we need to change something. Now, if you're within the range and you want to tell me till you're blue in the face that you're swinging down on the ball, then by all means, go for it. But we are trying to figure out a weakness in a hitter's swing and how we can, one, correct it, and two, optimize it.
A couple things that I'd like to ask you about there. Just the first one that you mentioned a couple times, just basically the time that it takes to swing the bat. So you're kind of measuring from when the swing first begins, launches, until contact. Maybe this is an obvious answer, but I just want to know how you communicate this with your players. Tell me why that's so important when it comes to being able to hit high levels of pitching once you get into college. And I don't, whether or not people are familiar with it, no matter what level of college you play, you're going to see really good arms. Maybe not, obviously, at the lower levels, you might not see them as often, but they're still there. And the higher level that you play, the more often you're going to face elite pitching. Why, as the pitching gets better, is that such an important stat for hitters? And maybe you kind of explain exactly what you're looking at timing-wise, like, from what point to what point, and why is that so important when you're coaching?
Well, the biggest thing is, I think it's speed versus quickness. And people confuse the two a lot. But you don't necessarily need to be, it's the same thing as, like, is the fastest guy on your team always the best base stealer? Not necessarily, but is it a lot of times, is it the quickest base stealer or the quickest runner? And there's differences that you can break down there. Looking at exact quickness times, for college guys, we're usually between like a 0.14 and a 0.15. And so that quickness helps them in fact of, one, not only base and velocity, but what happens when a guy has a good curveball. You know what I mean? Like, you want to keep that same quickness where the speed doesn't necessarily help you. Like, the speed might get your bat through the zone, but you need that quickness to be able to react to various pitches other than just a high velocity fastball. Is that kind of what you're looking for? Yeah.
I just wanted to see, a lot of it is just kind of how you communicate to players and why you think that's, one of the most important things that you're gathering from the data. Obviously just making. Sorry, go ahead.
And one of the other big things is communicating this with you versus communicating it with a player. We're obviously talking about it a lot different. Like, I'm not always going to tell a player, hey, your time to contact was 0.16. You need to get that down. Like, they don't know what that means. I don't even know if I know exactly how to correct that just by telling you that. But you place different constraints on the hitter, and they kind of self-correct. So, whether that's the use of an overload, an underload, bat, and just, like I said, placing those constraints on them, where they're forced to make that switch, and then they go back to a regular bat. They're in game. They're not like, oh, my time to contact needs to be quicker. It kind of just naturally happens.
Yeah, and I don't know, the higher level you go, the less time you have to make decisions, and clearly that becomes a really important part of being a good hitter. The earlier you've got to commit to the pitch, the worse your decisions are going to make. And I think that's a conversation that coaches have had forever with guys. And that's one of the things that, baseball people out there that are really anti-tech, I don't think that you should live and die by tech, but I do believe that there is a lot of really important data that you can glean from things, and that's one of them. I mean, the eye test is one thing. If a guy's swing looks slow, or if a guy's swing looks like his bat looks really quick and his hands look really fast, but if the data tells you that it either is or isn't, it's hard to argue with that. And I think it's however you present it to the player, it's an easier conversation to have when you say, look, this stat for you, the time that it takes for you to get your swing off and get to contact is a lot slower than it needs to be, and that's making you make decisions earlier. You're swinging at worse pitches than you would otherwise, and I think we should take some time to fix this. I think you're gonna have very few players who would look at that and say, like, no, I'm good. Like, I think that would mean something to them, and let them say, like, yeah, you're right. Like, hey, if I'm below average there, that's not a stat I want to be below average.
And that's one of the biggest things that we've seen from implementing technology is it's not my opinion, it's not any other coach's opinion. This is what the number's telling you. So you can argue with it all you want, but this is what it is, and you have a choice at that point to correct it or not.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, Billy, just about going somewhere else. If you went to another place, you would want to be able to coach in your style. And you're a pretty young guy, and a lot of young guys are kind of just still feeling out what their coaching style is. But if you had to sort of summarize what your style of coaching is, just say you were in an interview and a coach asked you what kind of a coach you are, what's your coaching style, what's your answer? What's the best way you can kind of summarize how you are as a coach on the field and off the field?
For me, it's I look at coaching as a two-way street, and I know kind of the old school methodology of it, and what I grew up playing with was, okay, if the coach says this, you listen. That's right. And working with my catchers, and I try and build the trust with them and get really close with those guys, and I tell them all the time, hey, if you don't like what I'm doing, tell me. You know what I mean? Because it's not about me anymore. It's about how do I make you better. And if I'm saying something that doesn't resonate with you, or the drills we're doing doesn't work, let's figure out something that does work. And so I'd say it's kind of a new age of coaching. Something else you hear a lot, especially like on these podcasts, is guys talk a lot about the ego. And for me, like I would say I don't really struggle with that because I didn't have an opportunity to play at that high of a level. And so like when a player tells me they don't like what I'm doing, I don't feel the need to necessarily take it personally. It's more of, okay, well, we need to figure out what you do like and what does work for you. I don't like placing rules on guys. I like giving them an ultimate goal. With catchers, for example, like you want a faster pop time. Okay, well, I'm going to try and give you the tools to do that. And if you don't want to listen, that's fine, but you need to come tell me why you don't want to listen. You need to tell me what works better. And I think it just needs to be more of a relationship aspect more than it is me constantly telling you what to do. I really try not to force guys into doing certain things, whether that's, receiving from a knee or receiving from 2 feet or whatever it is. Like I want to experiment. I want you to learn as we go. And my ultimate goal as a coach is that I don't have to coach you. You know what I mean? You can kind of figure out your own body. You can start to figure out that feel. You know what you need to work on, and I'm kind of just there when you have a question. Okay, let me help you.
Now that is an interesting thing to me, especially at the JUCO level, because a lot of times you don't have the players on your team for that long. Especially if you get transfers, which you and I talked beforehand, and I know that you do get transfers at Paradise Valley. So you might only have a transfer for one semester. I can remember specifically in my position, one of the most frustrating players I ever coached was a guy that we got the transfer in for one semester. As a freshman at a 4-year school, this guy was projected to be like a late first-round pick. And things kind of crumbled for him in a lot of ways at the 4-year school where he was. Academically, he really went down the tubes and just kind of had no choice but to go junior college, and this would have been his 6th semester in school. But he had only used 1 year of eligibility. But regardless, this is a guy that was at one point a first round draft pick as far as like Baseball America was concerned. After he had a great freshman year at a good Division I program, and when he came in, I was the hitting coach, and he and I would work together, and I would just kind of say, like, hey, I think this drill can really help you. He'd look me in the eye and say, okay, yeah, I get it. And we would do the drill, and I'd say, man, do you feel that? Like, that looks great. The ball's flying off your bat. I think this is great for you. And to my face, he would say, yeah, I like it. This looks good. It looks good. And, like, literally the minute I would turn my back, he would go back to doing what he was doing. And that was one of the most frustrating situations that I'd ever been in, but coaches now, it's very, very popular on social media for coaches to talk about how important it is to develop relationships with players, and how basically you feel like if you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job coaching, and that's what social media tells you. But I'll be one of the people to say that it's not always possible, because sometimes you only have a guy in your team for 3 months, and you're trying to win in month 1, and you don't have much time to develop a relationship with a guy, and you kind of need to get some production out of these guys right away. So at the JUCO level, Billy, you've only been there for a couple of years, but even at a couple years in junior college, I know you have that. You have guys that will transfer in. You don't have them. You have them for a year or a semester at most, and then they're gone. How do you go about having these conversations with these guys to say, like, I just want you to be honest with me here, and if you don't like something I'm doing, we got to talk about it, as opposed to the situation that I was in where a player was kind of giving me lip service, then he would go off and do his own thing because he just, I guess he thought he had it figured out or didn't want to have confrontation. I don't know what it was, but how do you have that conversation with guys that maybe you're not going to have for the full 2 years, you're only going to have for a short period of time, but in that period of time, you've both got to get on the same page pretty quickly if this is going to work?
Well, I think, one of the really cool things about being at a junior college is, as a coach, you have the ability to dangle that carrot above them. You know what I mean? Especially if it's a kid that transferred down from the Division I level, and all of a sudden they're out on a field where they don't have a locker room. There's nobody carrying their bags around, bringing them out to the field. There's no Gatorade in the cooler, things like that, and it kind of hits them like, oh wow, this is a lot different. But I still think it's relationship based, because if you know that about the kid, then that makes that conversation really easy. You know what I mean? Like, if you know they want to go back to the Division I level, and all depending on the kid, it can be a tough conversation, where it's kind of that tough love of, well, why do you think the Division I got rid of you? And so I think it all goes back to that relationship aspect of knowing how you can and how you can't talk to a certain player, but you also have that ability of, look, if you want to listen, we're going to get you back to where you want to be, and they have to trust that you're going to do that for them. And at the end of the day, I think there's always going to be players that you can't help. You're going to try your best to do everything in your power to help them and guide them along. But I'm sure there's plenty of teachers out there that'll tell you the same thing, that they spend plenty of time with a kid, and at the end of the day, if they don't want to learn and they don't want to try and grow, then that's, at some point, it's on them. And I have experienced that, and I've experienced it with players that came in as a freshman that thought, maybe I should have been a Division I player, and why am I here? And like I said, it all comes back to the relationship. It comes back to the tough conversation. And I think a lot of coaches kind of shy away from having those tough conversations. For me, being a younger coach, it's a little bit easier because I can relate to them. You know what I mean? I know what they're going through. I still remember what it feels like to be in their shoes and think that I'm being overlooked, or think that, I'm better than I actually am. And having not only a head coach tell you, but having that young assistant kind of in your back pocket, like, I'm here to help you, but I'm also here to tell you there's some things you need to change.
Yeah. I think most coaches have experienced a lot of, what you have, and, those conversations with players are not always easy to have. I wanted myself, as a coach, I always told myself that I was going to be honest with guys no matter what. I was going to tell them things they didn't want to hear necessarily, but I was always going to be honest with them. And some players, they think they want to hear the truth until they hear the truth. But I think as a coach, in fact, the Figured Out, our social media person just put a post out recently on the Figured Out website. There was a quote from Joe Madden. If I tell you that, if something, paraphrasing, if I tell you the truth, you might not like me for a couple days, but if I lie to you, you're going to hate me for the rest of your life. And that's how I felt as a coach. If I'm not straight up with these kids, I could tell them some things they want to hear now, but it's not going to help them. Ultimately, it's not going to help them, and it's probably going to hurt their careers.
Right. And it's a tough balance, and I'll say, like, as a young person, I'll be the first person to admit that, I don't have that figured out, and there's definitely times that I've said things to players that I probably shouldn't have said, and there's definitely been times where I should have said something and I didn't say it. Ultimately, I think that's part of the growing up, and gaining that experience as a coach, because, my head coach, he'll make decisions that I'll look at them sometimes and, what the hell are you doing? But it always pans out. And it's like, well, when you have 30 years of experience to kind of fall back on, you start to realize some of these things and what to say and what not to say. It's a tough battle. And like I said, especially as a young coach, it's tough to figure it out. Yeah,
and being with a good head coach that has some things figured out is always a great way to start. And And sometimes I had the same experience at a JUCO where I was. The head coach did some things that really made me scratch my head and say, "The hell are you doing here?" But it usually worked out. He usually had a plan. And even when he didn't have necessarily a well thought out or a fully thought out plan, it still seemed to work out in his favor. But sometimes you kind of catch on with those coaches that they're able to do that. So there's a lot of fun stuff you read about junior college on Twitter. Just like, I saw one of those things the other day. It's sort of like somebody throws something out there and you have to like finish the thought, and it said, tell me you are a JUCO bandit without telling me you're a JUCO bandit. So kind of like just weird stuff that happens, off the wall kind of stuff that happens, and it only happens at the JUCO level. And there are some funny stories out there. Is there anything in particular, Billy, that you had, any stories that you'd like to share just from your time either playing at Green River or coaching at Paradise Valley that would give those people out there who never had the JUCO experience, would give people an idea of just kind of what that means, that just the JUCO level is a little bit different than a lot of other levels out there? Can you think of anything?
As a coach, you see a lot less of some of the things that go on. As a player, I think I actually responded to that tweet, and my response was coming to our field to find human poop under the dugout bench. And it's just one of those things, like, it's not a stadium. We were playing on a high school field, and not in the nicest area of town either. And so, you would find needles and other things that we'll leave off the podcast laying around the field. But I think finding the pile of crap under the bench might have taken the highlight, because then, the worst part of it is coach is going to pick his least favorite player to go grab a rake or go grab a shovel and get it out of the dugout. So,
oh my God.
JUCO it's definitely a character building experience. I think that's changing a lot. Like, we're starting to see a lot more junior colleges now that do have stadiums, and they do have really nice fields, and so there's a little bit less of that. But at the end of the day, the mentality of JUCO players is, it goes back to not having Gatorade in your water bucket. So you're definitely building a little bit different type of player. We don't have the fancy scholarship or the fancy sponsorships, and it's just different. It's one of those, if you didn't live through it, it's hard to explain almost.
No question. When you brought up the experience that you had, I'm sure that every junior college has experienced something or another, but my first year of junior college coaching, and I didn't play at that level, but my first experience there, we had a player in the spring who was a transfer in from a school in Texas. I think he was at another JUCO in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, and we thought he could really hit, but he was kind of just a little bit of an issue off the field. And toward the end of the year, we left him home on a trip. He had I can't even remember what it was, Billy, but he had some sort of issue off the field, and we left him home for a trip. And it was at the end of the year, and we came home, and he was gone. He had left school. I don't even think he finished. I don't think classes were over, but it was like very, very much toward the end of the semester. But he left. And then when we finished up that day and I went to my car, one of my tires was slashed on my car, because he and I I was living in the dorm at the time, and he and I had to have a conversation about whatever was happening. And I wasn't ultimately the one that made the decision to leave him home. That was the head coach's decision. But I guess my car was just kind of the one that was the most accessible, I guess. But I don't have any firm, solid evidence that it was him, but pretty good idea. That's what happened with the car tire. So
right, the easy target.
Yes, yeah. As a junior college coach, you kind of talked about just that your players all have goals of moving on, which is always fun. It's always easier to coach guys that have the next step in mind, as opposed to the high school senior or the college senior who knows he's done. Sometimes those guys can lose motivation. What are some of your favorite parts about coaching that level? Is it the development part? Is it the constant recruiting? Is there anything in particular that you really like about the junior college coaching?
The development aspect is huge, just because we don't have any kind of time constraint on, as far as long as we can practice. I think the horror stories of the 8-hour-long practices, those are kind of gone, but out here in Arizona, we'll be out there in the fall, and it's 110 degrees out, and we're out there for 4.5 hours, and that can feel like 8 hours in that kind of heat. But, you know, it's just, I get to spend a lot more time with the players than you do at other levels. And going back to, like, what we were saying with the relationships, like, that's that much more opportunity to build that kind of relationship with a player. JUCO is also a huge eye-opener for kids. You know, they get there, they think, oh, I should have been a Division I kid, and they get there and realize all the kids on the team think they should have been Division I kids. You know, they're all good players. Almost all of them are all-state players, or you know, they were being looked at by Division I's. You know, so everybody's still a good player, and they realize, wow, I'm not that much better than these kids if I'm better than them at all. And so you see kind of this trend in JUCO where it's like that fall for an incoming freshman is they come in really hyped up, and then it hits them, oh man, this is college baseball, and it's way harder than high school baseball, and I'm not as good as I thought I was. And, you know, I always look back at kids that came in that first year, and you're like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do with this guy. I don't know where he's going to end up, you know, and then they end up committing to a Division I or a really good D2. And so just kind of seeing that growth over such a short period of time, I think, is probably one of the funnest aspects for me at that level.
Let's talk about coaching catchers a little bit too, Coach Barker. As a catcher's coach, the catching game is something that has evolved a lot in the last couple of years. It's changed a lot. This is as far as how it's done, what's looked at as the best way to do things, whether it's receiving, throwing, or even the goals of the position. You know, I saw something. I hate to keep referencing social media, but it's such a big part of honestly of coaching at this point. And but I saw something not that long ago, just a coach talking about a quote unquote catch and throw guy, and how those aren't necessarily they're not always tied together. Sometimes a guy is a good, you know, receiver catching, but sometimes he's really good at throwing, and sometimes he's good at both, but not always. But for me, when I was coaching, a catch and throw guy didn't mean receiving and throwing. It basically meant this guy can catch the ball and throw it to second base and stop the running game. And that was a really big part of catching at that time, more so than receiving. Like, to me, that term catch and throw guy doesn't mean receiving and throwing. It just means he can really shut the run game down. But that was maybe, especially at the big league level, that has changed a lot. And I know that it's trickled down to college and below, to where receiving is now thought of to be maybe the most important skill for catchers. And I'm curious with you and how you coach catchers, if there is a particular skill or two that you think are, at this point, the most important thing to be good at as a college catcher. Not to say that the other ones aren't important, but that, like, this is more important than others. Like, honestly, when I coached catchers for a little while. I was an emergency catcher in college, and you know, the receiving part of it was important, but not so much so that you were going to give up. You weren't going to make receiving a priority over blocking, and you weren't going to make receiving a priority over throwing base runners out, whereas now maybe that's flipped. So I just kind of want to see what your take is on just catching in general, you know, what you believe are the most important parts of catching for a college catcher, and I'm sure that reflects on how much time you spend on these particular areas.
Yeah, so as far as catching, I would say receiving is like the gold standard of it. That's, if you can't receive, then I don't want you as a catcher. You can be really athletic, and I can teach you how to receive, and I'll take you. But if I was going to rank them, it would be receiving, blocking, and throwing in that order. And these, you know, a lot of this is stemmed from Major League Baseball, because they do have all the data now that shows us, okay, receiving is going to, you know, the best receiver in the game is gaining, you know, 7 runs over a season or over a game, and you know, the lowest guys are getting negative runs, just because we can translate defensive ability into run save now. One of the big things that, like, something I always tell all the catchers, and I tell other coaches when I talk to them, is the position has changed in terms of the physical ability and what we're asking guys to do, but I think the mentality of catchers has stayed the same, and that's something I try really hard to impart on my catchers. Like, it's still the most physical position on the field. I'm a little biased, but I think it's the smartest position on the field. And so, you know, we still try and train that aspect of it. But I would say I'd spend anywhere from 75 to 80% of practice time with catchers on receiving, and then the rest on blocking. Throwing, I've kind of just implemented a throwing program when they're playing catch, warming up, just because we don't always have the time to get into, okay, I'm going to have you throw to third, throw to second. And, you know, I don't want to recruit guys that have a negative arm. You know, you don't have to have the best arm to come play for us, simply because I put throwing lower on the totem pole than I do receiving and blocking.
I think it's great, and I like hearing that. I like just kind of hearing how things are progressing in college, and just sort of how, just things have changed in the coaching world in a short period of time. Are you a one knee or two knee receiving guy, or does it depend on the catcher and his physical abilities?
I would say I am a experiment guy. You know, let's find out what's going to put you in the best position to receive the most strikes. And, you know, if we're going to look at Major League Baseball as an example, you have guys like Austin Barnes with the Dodgers, who is phenomenal from 2 feet. You know, we rarely, if ever, see him go down to a knee, and he's lights out. Now, I can't always ask guys to do what Austin Barnes does, and it's a lot easier to put them down in a one-knee setup, and they receive a lot more strikes. The other aspect that I think gets lost in this is it's completely situational. You know, if you have the tying run on third and it's bottom of the ninth inning, okay, maybe blocking the ball has a little bit more weight than receiving a strike right here. So it's kind of finding the middle ground and a good balance for that specific catcher. I will say that in my experience, the majority of these guys benefit hugely from dropping down to a knee. If we're looking at the receiving aspect of it. As far as blocking, I would say the same thing. I think majority of guys are blocking just as good, if not better, from a knee. And I don't have access to the same technology that Major League Baseball does. So, you know, there's a little bit more subjectivity in that, but I have yet to run into an issue of a guy that's set up in one knee and he all of a sudden can't block a baseball.
And certainly that's where things would come into play if you get into the game. And that's kind of, again, another thing of just how it's always been, that you don't necessarily want to change a hitter. You don't want to change the hitter on the first day of the fall until you really see, okay, this part of your swing is prohibiting you from doing this. That's when you've got to make changes. And probably the same with catchers. If you experiment with a guy blocking on one knee and you pretty consistently have balls that should have been blocked that aren't, that's going to be a problem. So my next question was going to be, do you have a preference, or do you ask catchers to change based on the game situation? Example, nobody on base, are they receiving more often on one knee, and with guys on where they have to block, they potentially have to throw, are they more often than not on 2 feet? Or, again, is that an individual thing, or are you seeing that really isn't that much of a difference with most of your guys?
No, I think the situation of the game is what completely dictates what the catcher's doing. And, you know, a guy getting on first base, traditionally it was, okay, we got to get ready to throw him out. We have to get into a secondary stance, which I don't even teach anymore. Like, secondary stance isn't even in my vocabulary at this point. I would rather teach a guy to throw from a knee, because what does the hitter have to do to score the run from first? You know what I mean? He has to hit a triple, a pass ball. Okay, he gets the second. And I know there's going to be a lot of guys that hate me for that, but, you know, giving up bases, especially second base, isn't the end of the world, because even if he's on second, you still got to, you know, if he can't run, okay, you still got to hit a double. If he can run, the guy still has to hit a single. So if you start looking into the probabilities of certain situations, I think like a runner on first, we're still from a knee, especially if it's a catcher that they've been able to learn how to throw from a knee. Then yeah, we're going to keep you down to a knee. I think it starts to change a little bit once they're on second, and it definitely changes once they're on third. At that point, I would rather put a guy where are you most comfortable, you know, because yes, you have to block the baseball at this point. You know, if he tries to steal third, you have to be able to throw him out. So I want you to set up to give yourself the best chance of success. But understand, like, receiving strikes is still huge, and not even receiving strikes, but if we're receiving balls off the plate that the guy's not swinging at, and we're getting those as strikes, that can help a lot more than worrying about the ball in the dirt.
And that's, again, just things that have changed, a mentality that has switched, and that's a big deal. Is part of that, let me ask you this, I I guess without imparting anything on you, why do you think that's changed? You're still a fairly young guy. I don't know when this change came about, but I've got to believe that when you were, in high school and college, the one knee style probably didn't really come into play until you started coaching. I think just in the last couple of years in the big leagues, it really started being sort of the standard that you saw. Why do you think now in Major League Baseball it's happened because teams are running less? So a catcher's value really comes from stealing strikes. But in college ball, I don't know that teams are necessarily running less. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But in your opinion, Billy, why has this also trickled into college where receiving is now the gold standard as opposed to a guy that can really block, a guy that can really throw, a guy that can really shut down the run game?
Yeah, ultimately it all comes back to the technology and the fact that we can now see the probability of a run scoring with the guy on first, and if he's still second, how that probability changes. Which ultimately started with professional baseball, but even in the higher ranks of college baseball, all the Power Fives have a TrackMan set up. You know what I mean? They're recording the same data, and it's just kind of trickled down. And I think the more you go down in level, the more all three of those become important. Receiving, throwing, and blocking. Obviously, at lower levels, if you look at like youth baseball, you're struggling to throw strikes at that point, and so maybe receiving isn't that important. I mean, we know receiving isn't that important at that level. Once we get into college, as coaches, we tend not to recruit guys that throw a bunch of balls. You know what I'm saying? So the importance of a strike, it might carry less weight at the college level, but it still carries a huge weight as compared to the blocking and throwing aspect.
Yeah, you don't recruit guys typically that don't throw strikes unless they throw really hard.
Really hard.
We'll still take those guys. With coaching catchers, you said you spend a lot of your time on receiving stuff. I know you can't physically demonstrate anything, but is there anything in particular that you can tell people listening to this, maybe some of their favorite things to do with guys, whether that's maybe like weighted balls or some implements I've seen in some drills, like guys catching frisbees or whatever, maybe catching tennis balls barehanded, working with a machine, throwing high velocity. Like, is there anything in particular you can just kind of talk about that are some of your favorite things to do with your players?
I think it all starts with, for me, there's two big aspects of receiving really well, and that's the timing and pocketing the baseball. And so most of the drills that I do are going to constrain one or the other. And so, like you said, like we'll start with a lot of bare hand stuff, with weighted balls, with wrist weights, with a J-band, just changing it up from what they're going to feel in a game, possibly making it a little bit harder than it is in a game. And then, we move into a machine, and one of my favorite things to do with a machine is like, okay, we're at 50 feet, velocity's cranked up, we're going to pump that in there, and, we're always working. I rarely work like a straight fastball unless it's just a guy trying to get a feel for moving the ball into the zone. So a lot of times I'll set up, a right or a left-handed curveball or some kind of a slide or something like that. And then I'll also have, we'll start with the velocity, and then I'll move the thing out behind the mound, and, we're at 70, 75 feet, and it'll have a lob. So we're changing the timing a little bit, because I do like guys working the ball back into the zone and finding kind of that feel for the pocket. I've always heard, and anybody that's caught knows this to be true, like there's an acoustic to a strike, right? Like you get that loud pop, and so like I'm always telling guys, where's the pop? And it's not me telling you to pocket the baseball or how to pocket the baseball, but it's how do you organize your body to get that sound. And so you pair that with the timing, and I think those are the two biggest aspects of receiving strikes.
I love that. One last question I want to ask you, Coach Barker, before I let you call it a night here. You're a young coach, but to me, you're impressive because I think that you clearly have ideas on things. I think that you feel like you've got a good feel for some things. And to me, a coach that is your age, your experience level, who can have confidence in what he's doing and feel confident in it, but not not overconfident to the point where they feel like they don't have to learn anymore. I enjoy talking to young coaches that are in your position, and assuming that you're lucky enough or whatever, or skilled enough to stay in this game a long time. What do you hope to get out of coaching baseball? If assuming that's a career that you have for the next 30 years, like if you're able to do that, what do you hope to get out of this? Who do you want to be seen as in the coaching world? Maybe you haven't thought about it before. Maybe this is the first time you've really thought about it. But would like to know just kind of what you want to get out of this and who you want to be in the coaching world. Assuming you're able to coach for a long time.
The biggest thing for me, I think, is number one, turning it into a career. Getting to that point where you can comfortably say, this is my job, this is my career. All the coaches, all the head coaches in our conference, they've done it a long time, and they're not leaving that spot. And I respect every single one of them for the fact that they've gone through what I've gone through, and they now have the ability to basically do a child's game as a job. And so, I don't think there's I don't necessarily need to be like a Hall of Fame coach, and I don't need all the accolades, huge win records. I think it's more, how many players can I have an impact on, and how long can I actually do this? The big thing is just, I want to look back and be able to say, hey, my whole life, I got a business degree and thought I was going to do that, but my whole life I was a coach. That's ultimately the big thing, is I just want to be able to say that I did that for my entire career.
It's a luxury, and obviously for guys that do it, there are a lot of sacrifices along the way, and I think that I think anybody that coaches at any level, it's not just college coaches, high school coaches give up an incredible amount of time with their families for almost nothing pay wise. A lot of high school coaches and travel coaches probably spend more than they make throughout their time coaching. So I think anybody that coaches for a long time and really has the player's best interest at heart, deserves accolades and applause from people. And anybody that just does it with the kids in mind, I think, is unique, because not everybody that coaches has that. A lot of guys that coach do it for other reasons, and I always just appreciate talking to people who have a good perspective. This is Billy Barker, everybody, and I think, Billy, you're, as a young coach, there's just a maturity about you that I enjoy, and I've enjoyed our conversation a lot. This has been a great podcast. I sincerely appreciate you joining me for this, and just all the things that you shared, and I'm excited to see what happens with you. I think people that listen to this hopefully will agree with me that I think you've got a bright future in coaching, and just want to wish you all the best and hope things work out for you. And one more time, just thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast with us today and just share all your thoughts and feelings.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of get out there and throw my name out there a little bit and get a little recognition. So I definitely appreciate you having me on.